Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can even use that code OmniPoke for an extra 5% discount on your orders. Today we're going to be looking at the up-and-coming Sword and Shield rule changes. We got a big bit of news over on the video game side, but there was also a little update or a little post about the things that are going to be changing in the TCG come February 7th, which I believe is the release date, down here, for our Sword and Shield stuff. And there's a few things that have already been referenced in some sort of types of cards that have been revealed so far, but also some stuff that we haven't heard about before as well. So I'm going to be going over those today, giving you my first sort of reaction about these. A lot of them are just logical things. Not many of them have a huge impact on actual gameplay. Just some things to bear in mind overall. So we're going to quickly take a look through this stuff. They're basically just saying the new series of Sword and Shield is coming out with V and V Max shaking up the game, making their debut. And we're looking at some existing rules and mechanics and things that are changing. So obviously they reference the first turn rule change. And that's the only thing they reference. The only thing they reference is the fact that the player who goes first cannot play a supporter card for the first turn. So that pretty much rules out every chance that there will be any other new first turn rule changes. So it is only going to be that, the fact that you can no longer use supporters on your first turn, and we retain the restriction of not being able to attack on your first turn. That's all it's going to be. They actually reference that they're trying to make it less advantageous to go first, which I think is absolutely correct. There was an obvious choice for a number of years for us to just say, yes, heads, I'll go first, obviously. And now it's a bit different, which I think is pretty cool. So I think this is a good way of them trying to address it. Who knows how long it'll last for? Might just be for the Sword and Shield block. It might be something that works out really well and we keep for, again, like a number of years. Previously, we've had the previous set of rules, turn 1, for a number of years, a really large amount of time. Like 7 years or something like that. So we better get used to this, because it feels like it'll be something that they'll have for at least the Sword and Shield block, and then they'll maybe look towards whether or not it's worth changing again. So that's just a confirmation on the rule change of the first turn. I do have a other separate video about the first turn rule changes if you want to see more detailed analysis on that. They also go into talking about weakness and resistance and how that's going to be changing. Resistance is now going to be a -30 rather than a -20 for a long time. We still have weakness of ×2 for all of our Pokemon. So resistance is getting a small buff, so it might make some tech cards a little bit more effective to try and shut down opposing archetypes. Rather than just shutting them down with weakness, you can now also try and shut them down with resistances and tankiness and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. Makes resistance much more relevant. At the moment, weakness is the only thing that matters, right? If you are playing a deck that has weakness against another, you have such an advantage, and resistance barely ever scratches the surface of actually changing gameplay. And this is making a more reasonable push in a fairer direction, I guess you could say, and making the part of this card just a little bit more relevant. So I think that's fine. Also, the physical resistances have been changed, and they've talked about these. So water-type Pokemon will have weakness to lightning instead of grass. Psychic-type Pokemon will have weakness to dark instead of psychic. So we're not going to have Mewtwo X-Ball walls ever again, or at least in the Sword and Shield block. And dark-type Pokemon are going to have weakness to grass instead of fighting. Obviously, there's other things that already have weakness to fighting, like colorless stuff a lot of the time. So you can see why they're trying to balance things out in this regard. So they've basically switch it all up. Dark is now weak to grass, so they have a relevant type to be weak against, and then the water stuff is weak to lightning, which gives them something to hit for weakness, whereas they're getting hit for fighting. So it's making it more circular rather than zigzagging all over across the place. And there are some types that don't naturally hit things for weakness as much as they should, and there are some types that get hit for more weaknesses than others. So yeah, they've tried to balance it in a lot fairer way. And again, it's all pretty reasonable stuff. So nothing to be too surprised about. I think they're doing a good job of making it more linear. Yes, every now and then there's going to be a card where you look at the weakness and you're like, why the hell does this card have a thingy weakness? Because you look at it in the game, and then in the game it is no weakness at all like that. Think of even the new Sableye V coming out. It's a Dark-type Pokemon. The card is a Dark-type Pokemon, so it is therefore weak to grass. But obviously Sableye in the games isn't just a Dark-type Pokemon, right? So it is obviously not Wheategrass in the video games. So there'll be cards that will look stupid. There's going to be like Araquanids and stuff that have weakness to like fire and things like that, which is going to be really weird, but we just got to put up with it. So there you go. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but in terms of actually making the game function better, makes a lot of sense. So also they're discussing a little bit more on this sort of weakness resistance, kind of jumping on the back of that thing with a type rearrangement. They've put it in its own category, not just lumped it in with the weakness and resistance, because it does have a big impact. They are cutting the pink cards. We are no longer getting the fairy type TCG cards. They've introduced an XY. Looks like it was just a trial run, and it's not going to stay for the Sword and Shield series. They're now being brought into the psychic type, so it actually fits in really well when a lot of the poison types are moving over to the dark stuff. That shows like the incentive that they're going to shoehorn things into that psychic type instead. And they even mention it here, poison stuff in the video games will now be represented by dark types instead of psychic types. So Fairy, obviously there are still cards that are being used in Standard. Gardevoir Sylveon, one of the top decks right now. And obviously, you know, we can still use Fairy Energy and stuff. But in the future, it may be something that they change. So that's something to bear in mind. I imagine when they rotate to Sword and Shield on, Fairy Energy will cease to exist for a time being at least. So yeah, Fairies, rest in peace. They were showcased in X and Y. Obviously that was the era where Fairies were first conceived, the first time we got to see Fairy Pokemon, and then they sort of back updated lots of Fairy Pokemon. Things became Fairy types in the video game that were never previously Fairy types, right? But that was all done in the XY era, so maybe it's one of those things where they want to give Sword and Shield a different flavor, give it a different feel to the game, when they were trying to really push an XY identity with the Fairy type stuff. That's something that Sword and Shield doesn't really care about so much, so they're making that change, which sounds kind of cool as well to me. So for erratas, these are not going to be changing any cards that we... like, all the cards that are going to be in our Standard are not going to change at all. These erratas are pertinent to previous iterations of cards, so that means that we're able to play with older copies of cards. So essentially, all those people who want to bling out their deck with some old school, you know, EX Emerald reverses, some Unseen Forces cards, some Skyridge Hyper Potions, got to get them out of my storage, you know, so I can play with these old cards, because that's always a small gripe when there are cards that are basically being reprinted but with much neater text. It's a real shame that we're not able to use the old cards, because obviously there's a lot of history behind these. Some people who have been playing for, you know, tens of years now, the game has been going on for, they want to show that off. They want to style on people with some of the cool artwork and stuff. You can see that old Citrus Berry. We're getting Citrus Berry in the new sets, and they're basically just saying that the text has to be read this way rather than reading the text itself on the Unseen Forces version. So kind of, again, makes sense. It's a nice nod to like old school collectors and people who like to bling out their decks. Not going to affect me in the slightest. I always play the newest copy of cards and such. But it's cool to see that they're making this known, that they are aware of all of these cards and players who care about these old cards and wanting to play the old copies of cards. They still can play them. There's no need for them to go ahead and buy the new stuff. Like, if you've already got yourself a bunch of Power Pads from Ultra Prism, you can keep playing them, even though you know now that it goes up to 2 support cards, going in line with the Power Pad that we're getting from Sword and Shield. So it's not like these are new cards like joining the game. They're cards that are coming in Sword and Shield, and if you've previously got copies of these cards, you don't need to go out and buy them again. So again, just a nice thing for us, really. They also reference professors. Now, this is one of the most interesting things for me. The debut of Professor Magnolia is going to be called Professor's Research, and it seems to me, by this block of text, they're saying that Professor's Research in the future will be the name given to new Professor cards. And it says right here, in the upper right corner, the card will remain Professor's Research. Now, when they're talking about new Professors in the future, I'm really not completely clear on whether or not it's going to be new Professors from new generations. So, like, if we move on from Sword and Shield into the next era or whatever, and there's a new professor or whatever, it'll still be called Professor's Research, just to stop having this expanded headache that they seem to have created for themselves, where you'll end up having to ban loads and loads of individual cards over and over again, just by name overlapping kind of things. They're trying to cut that out. So it's either like a very long-term vision that they're thinking of, or there might be other Professors-style supporter cards called Professor's Research under this same umbrella, that will have different effects, and they will still have to compete with the number of Professor's Research we can play in our deck. So they almost act as a supporter A-spec kind of thing. It's something that I really want to happen, because I think it's going to be a really cool deck-building challenge if that ever is a thing. I do think it's more likely to be the thing that I said at the start, where it's just them protecting themselves for future and not having to ban a million cards that all have the same text on. And stopping confusion for newer players coming into the game. That's the logical, easy way that is probably why they've done this change. But there's also this cool card creation element that could come into play, where we, in future Sword and Shield sets, will continue to get different Professor's Research cards with different upper right-hand corner text and different actual text on the card here. But we can only play 4 maximum copies of Professor's Research as the umbrella, and then you have to pick and choose what's the best Professor's Research for each specific deck. And I think one of the small complaints I have about the TCG is that draw engines oftentimes just become, like, the best draw engines just become the bread and butter, like, over and over again. You'll see a copy-paste of supporter lines in all sorts of different decks. There were eras when you just played 4 Sycamore, 4 N. There were times where you just played like a number of supporters, and then you played like a number of VS Seekers. You played lots of one-off supporters just to have that versatility around VS Seeker. There were eras, like even recently, there are welder decks, there are green decks, and you just sort of take out the basic energies and take out the physical Pokemon, and the shell is relatively the same. I think if there was a sort of Professor's Research competition for having specific cards good in different areas could be really cool. So I would love to see that as a personal, like, creative standpoint for deck building, because that's still one of my main passions in the game, is initially looking at new cards and deck building. I think it would cause a really nice challenge for players. Obviously, this Professor's Research that we currently have is just simply really, really strong, so it's going to be hard to dethrone this if you are making any other Professor's Research cards as supporters, but it would also be cool to see. So I'm not 100% certain on this. They don't clarify that, like, we're only getting this one for Sword and Shield, nor really should they, because they want to keep that open for themselves. But it would be really awesome if we could see something like that. And they also mentioned that immediately you can't play for Professor's Research and for Juniper or for Sycamore. They basically follow the same rules. You can only have 4 copies maximum of discard your hand, draw 7 as a total. So there you go. Pokemon Checkup is going to be the new between turns phase. That's going to be the like keyword that they use now. Rather than just saying between turns this happens. And they've actually broken down the Pokemon Checkup phase into these 4 stages. You check for special conditions in the order of poison, burn, asleep, paralysis. Then you check abilities and effects of trainer cards that happen during Pokemon Checkup. And then you choose, you can choose a step before checking special conditions. However, you can't mix the 2 steps. So if, for example, there's something like a hypnotoxic laser, right, where you... no, that wouldn't work. I need to think of something that would have like a double status effect. I'm sure there will be something, but like if you're doing a damage modification and then you're also checking for a status and then you have to go for like a different status, they can't like cross over is basically what it says. So you can mix and match the first 2 steps however you want to, but essentially you can't start looking for status, then jumping to the next step, then going back to look at another status condition. You do one, complete that one, like you do all 4 of these checks, then you do the checks for the other stuff, or vice versa, and then you move on to the final stage, which is checking for knockouts. So yeah, very simple stuff there. Recover is going to be the new keyword. So again, we have the 2 new keywords here. Pokemon Checkup phase, which is after your opponent has announced an attack. It is before it comes into your turn, before you have drawn to begin your next turn. The phase in between that is now the Pokemon Checkup phase, because you're literally checking the condition of the Pokemon that are in play before your opponent can react to that. So that's really it. And then recover is the next keyword that we have. This is relating to status conditions. If you are no longer affected by a status condition, you are now recovered from a status condition. So if you flip heads on a sleeping Jirachi, it recovers from sleep. And if you use a Pokemon Center Lady on a poisoned whatever, they have now recovered from that poison. It's just like how we say we heal damage with a max potion. You know, you've healed 120, but now if you're using a Center Lady, you heal 60, recover the status that you were affected by. Very simple stuff. It's just making it easier, I think, on a card text perspective. I think there'll be one thing that you'll notice, that a lot of these two rule changes, the checkup phase, the recover keyword, and also the removal of text down here, really shows the direction of the TCG, where they're trying to simplify the game. I think they're worried that the cards are getting too wordy. They're becoming too much like Yu-Gi-Oh! There are, you know, like 100-word abilities sometimes. Like, even if you look back at like Alolan Ninetales GX, you know, that card only had like that much space for picture because there was that much block of text, and that was on a full art card. And I think the Pokemon trading card game are really aware of that. They want to keep their aesthetics very high, so kids buy the shiny cards. And they also, you know, at the end of the day, it's still a fundamentally children's card game. They want it to be easy to pick up for everyone. So giving things these key terms will limit the number of words, make it less confusing for all people, and it just makes sense. So we've got the checkup keyword, the recover keyword, and also there's another text removal that we'll be, well, not seeing, I guess, in Sword and Shield cards. There used to be a phrase, before your attack, which was included on a number of abilities. And essentially that was just clarifying that this is something you could only do before your attack. And attacking is the last action of every turn. It's the only reminder, right? Everything you do, you can do in any order in the Pokemon TCG in your turn, other than drawing for turn. That's what kickstarts it all. You always start on a draw. You always end on an attack or a pass. And everything else in between you can do in any order that you like. So having these abilities with this little before your attack text was just a little prompt for you to remind yourself that you can't, you know, attack the ability. Like other card games, sometimes there are attack phases, then there are main phase 2s and stuff like that. So they've done away with the before you attack text, just because there were some awkward situations where abilities may seem like they could be activated after attacks had happened. They actually give the example, Persian GX has the Slashback GX attack. It can force itself to the bench after attacking. And Heatran's ability, when it becomes active, that's when its ability becomes live. And you would, in theory, after using a Slashback, be able to move energies onto Heatran GX, but that's misleading. You would not be able to do that after a Slash back GX attack, because attacking ends your turn. You can't do anything else. So they literally say, to prevent this confusion, that text is going to be removed. I think preventing confusion, obviously very good, and just being less wordy overall, just for the aesthetics of the card, makes a lot of sense, and making it more accessible for beginners. I think a lot of the time, especially in base sets, and this is a new base set of a new generation, the Sword and Shield base set, they don't want to get bogged down in a bunch of wordy nonsense. If new players are coming into the game, oftentimes when new generations of sets come out, it's a great time for new players, right? Because the game is changing, it's more accessible, new generation in terms of the video game, so there are more people drawn towards Pokemon recently. They may start exploring the trading card game after really enjoying playing on the Switch. So trying to make it simple, having these keywords that people can latch on to a lot easier. You know, we know keywords all over the place in TCG without knowing it. We know Mulligan, we know Donk, we know, you know, like Snipe, all these sort of things. These keywords are just a catalog already in your head, your own jargon, and it's just easier to remember these keywords than, or like, it's better that they've structured these keywords for us, because it just makes it very simple. So as soon as we see that word on a card, we recognize it straight away. It really does make sense for ongoing cards being released. And I think most of the time this block of text does nothing for players who are experienced in the game, because you already know, you don't need that prompt. And for players coming into the game, as you could say, it can only cause confusion in certain situations, and that prompt isn't really helping anyone overall. So yeah, all kind of makes sense there. They're making cards less wordy is the overall gist of these 3 paragraphs, which is fine. And then finally, we have regulation marks that they're referencing. Regulation marks has been something that we've had in the Japanese cards for a number of sets. You'll actually see that the D block is the one that we begin with in Sword and Shield, because the Japanese have had an A, B, and C block. I think they've only just rotated away from their B block to their standard. When Sword and Shield came out, those 2 sets in Japan came out for them. I believe they rotated their B block, which brought them up in line with us to Ultra Prism on, basically. They just simply have Sword and Shield before us right now. We are kickstarting with a D block, which kind of gives us a great indication of what will rotate for us, which is going to be really awesome. We can just follow the Japanese C block, then the D block, probably. So it gives players a great indication of sort of bang for your buck. There's a lot less conjecture over what's going to be rotating for us. And also, there's a lot less conjecture of what's actually in standard. All you need to look at is the bottom left corner right next to the card, and you know immediately, boom, it's a C. Unfortunately, it's rotated. Boom, it's a D. Yes, I can play this. Even if it is an obscure McDonald's promo, you don't need to go asking, 3 of your friends to see if this is actually in standard and doing all sorts of Google searches and getting word of mouth. You can just see right there in the card, boom, there's the mark on every card that we're getting to see if it is essentially in standard or not. So I think it's a really good thing that's being implemented. It's been trialed in Japan. It seems really good. It just means that the Pokemon card game themselves need to be very aware of where they want their rotations to be and such. But it'll give a great indication for us as players, because also it means when you're also trying to introduce new players, they can also very much take into account cards of different blocks. If you're starting off the game and let's say you start off from Sword and Shield, maybe you just try and buy the maximum amount of cards from D stuff and only buy the core essentials from stuff that doesn't have a D mark. Essentially, we will count everything that doesn't have a D mark as C, right? Just a hidden C that we have on all of our cards pre-Sword and Shield, because you know that you'll probably get a couple years out of the D block, and you'll probably only get the remainder of this season for the C block. So, yeah. That's just very good going. I again think it's just great clarity for your customer base. It's great clarity for players. And it's just simple. When you're flicking through a binder, you can just look in the bottom corner and be like, oh, sorry, dude, that's rotated. Let's take this out of my playables binder, throw it into my expanded binder. So a lot of this just screams good decision making. It's making cards physically clearer, more clarity on rotation for us. There's a lot less speculation on that front, I would imagine. A lot less waffle on these cards. Keywords will cut down a huge amount of text. You'd be surprised how much keywords can cut down from text. Looking at card games like Hearthstone, the amount of keywords that they use, it's pretty crazy, and it cuts down so many words from all of their cards. And I think Pokemon are trying to do a similar effect here, where they're just trying to make, the more supporters they can have that have this one line of text, the more happy Pokemon are. That's what they want to have. You get to show off beautiful artworks and not be bogged down in wordiness for younger players, newer players, and experienced players who basically see cards mechanically rather than like for example, when you're learning a new set, right? When I look at like a quick ball, I don't know all the words of a quick ball. I just know that you discard one and you grab a basic. That's in my head, discard one, grab basic. That's all I need to know, right? So we experienced players who go to tournaments and stuff, we basically see every Pokemon card as this text. When you see a Keldeo, no hits by GXs, 110 gets through everything, and then it has Riotous Beating. Not Riotous Beating, what's it called? Dangerous Rogue, right? Those are the 3 things I think of a Keldeo, right? You don't actually read every word in your head for like all the cards, so mechanically it means nothing for us. They're just de-wording it for newer players, basically, which is pretty cool. Card erratas, that's just a good nod to people who've been collecting for ages. Tight rearrangement, sure, some people won't be happy about fairies going, but I think it's, again, more sort of in line with this circle of typing and making it more fair, making sure that every type hits for one weakness and only one weakness, and making it a more fair circle rather than Psychic hitting into itself, and Lightning not really hitting anything, hitting like some water stuff, but then not a lot of other water stuff, and then hitting like some colorless stuff, but not all of them. It's making it a lot more linear. As soon as you see the type of a card, you know immediately bad against red, good against green. You know, as soon as you see this color, you know what you don't want to see, you know what you are happy to face. So it's making it, again, just very streamlined, making it more simplified, I think, in a lot of ways. But it all makes sense. It all points in the right direction, I think. Clarity on the rule change is really sweet. And yeah, I think overall I'm really happy with all these rule changes. Nothing stands out to me as a bad decision or anything I oppose at all. I think the only thing people might be a little bit sad about is the loss of fairy Pokemon. Because it feels like you've lost something rather than gained something new, where everything else in this is like a gain of something new, I would say. But, you know, the fairy type is a very small type. Like I said, it was a big selling points or sort of new feature of X and Y, so it felt very XY-esque. So it's not that surprising, but it's kind of cut off. Now that we've moved on into Sword and Shield. Yes, it lasted the Sun and Moon block, but that's only a handful of cards. So, you know, tip my cap to the fairy types, but I'm pretty fine with them going, and all the fairy Pokemon just jump into that psychic category now. So there's still plenty of interesting psychic cards that we'll be getting in the future. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on all these clarifications and changes coming in with Sword and Shield. I'm getting super excited about this set. I still can't believe we haven't seen all the cards. And I'm really, really ready to go in terms of getting my set review out and getting new decks on the way. I'm just waiting for that day where we get the scans from Poker Beach or from wherever else. And I'm just going to instantly get that set review recorded like the very next day. I've got all my other slides ready to go. Everything everything from the Sword and Shield cards, that's already in slides, ready to go. I just need to get the next like 60 cards that we're getting from the Japanese set in February as well. They actually, I think we have the same release date for their VMAX Rising, I think it's called, their VMAX Rising set. And we'll see if we get any cards from that set. If we are, the 50 or 60 cards that I'll have to read through, I'll read through the ones that are good, get slides of those, and then get videos on the way, because I'm super ready to start playing Sword and Shield. I'm not going to the Bochum Regionals, so I have nothing really to play for in Standard. Expanded to the next tournament for the Americans, so it feels like we're all just raring to go on Sword and Shield. So yeah, this is a great way to kick off my excitement, and man, I'm just waiting for some scans, to be honest. So let me know your thoughts on the rule changes, and yeah, I'll see you tomorrow for another video, guys. Cheers.